Hello, everybody. Welcome again to the Doomer Optimism podcast. I have a special guest host today, Vince Horn. Vince, you've been a guest on the podcast before, right?
Yeah, it's pretty cool to be on the other side of the mic with you this time. Thanks for
Yeah.
inviting me.
Yeah. So Vince is helping me host, and there's a reason for that. One, because the nature of the conversation today is about how we can use technology to achieve our values. In particular, both Vince and I have talked a lot about bioregional coordination, helping to build bioregional economies. We'll talk about why bioregionalism, I suppose, in a bit. We live a couple hours away from each other. We're friends in real life. And so we have that commonality. And Vince, you're also kind of, in general, you're kind of a techno optimist, would you say, or kind of you're
Recovering.
the potentiality of technology, and so especially
Yeah.
technology aligned with pro-social values. Do you want to introduce yourself before we introduce the others?
Yeah, I mean that's a good introduction. My background professionally is I'm a Dharma teacher, meditation teacher slash technologist and entrepreneur. So I try to bring those two worlds together. And yeah, I'm very interested in the values side of the conversation and how to use technology platforms in particular, and then I guess ecosystems and Web3 language and thinking, how to leverage those for great change because they're clearly such huge levers. So yeah, I'm curious about all that stuff.
Nice. All right. Claire, do you want to go first, introduce yourself, and how everything that kind of led you up to Hylo?
Yes, sure. Um, that's a long story. But I grew up in the Chesapeake bioregion in Northern Virginia, right outside Washington, D.C. I spent a lot of time in D.C. and that culture. It's a very interesting place. I was in the First, I was in the nonprofit world in communications, and then I learned how to code, and I became a software engineer working at startups. And I got to the point of achieving like everything I had been taught was worth achieving, like a marriage, a house, a six-figure job, those things. And I wasn't happy. I really felt a strong disconnection from the earth. And I set out to discover that connection. And that journey took me around the world. It took me to a permaculture design course in Costa Rica. It took me to California to a cannabis farm. I had been pulled to California energetically. I'd felt a call to come out here for like 10 years and eventually made it out here to the Bay Area and immediately fell in with like the exact sort of people I was hoping to find. Like definitely the techno optimist crowd, but also people that were driven by purpose and taking big action in the world to try to create a transition to a world that works for all, the regenerative movement, so called. And yeah, I had been looking for a way to use my technology skills to advance regeneration. And first, I connected with Regen Network, which is an incredible, amazing organization. I worked with them for a year. And then I met the crew behind Terran Collective because I was staying with another friend in the group house that they lived in San Francisco. And so I met Tibet and Aaron and just completely fell in love with who they are and what they're trying to do, which is amplify cooperation in service to regeneration. And they're technologists and I'm a technologist. So it's like, of course, here's our hammer, here's the nail. We'll just build technology to solve all of our problems. And so we've been on that journey ever since. And Hylo came to us shortly after that as a gift for us to steward. And we've been using it to try to meet the needs that we have in our organizing and in our work, and the needs of a lot of amazing partners that have come into our field. So, yeah, I think that's how I got to this moment in a nutshell.
Great. Thomas?
Hello, yes. I'm Tom Watson, and I am an Australian who have found their way to this strange land. I actually, that journey for me, what has taken me here originally was ultimate frisbee. For like the first sort of 15 years of my life, I was making all my life decisions around that. And it was one of those things where I was like, I knew that there was a lot of things about the world that were of concern to me, but it was like my indulgence was to spend all the time doing frisbee. So now that's done, that's past me, and I have to get on with the work of saving the world. Part of that journey, Jason earlier mentioned that you've studied or have a lot of like education in geography. That is the line of continuity through a lot of my work career. But I'd never actually studied it directly. I did international relations, and I actually sort of was skilled up in that realm by working in the Australian intelligence community. I worked as a geospatial analyst, intelligence analyst, and that included a stint to Afghanistan. That was a very interesting time in the sort of the belly of the beast, as somebody that also protested the Iraq War, and a lot of my friends were kind of like, like, you're a hippie, what are you doing? But very fascinated by both like conflict and understanding the nature of that. Also just like seeing the extremes of what humanity is doing to itself, and trying to like take all that in and bring that to, again, like inch by inch in our own small way, like trying to push us towards a world that a vision for the world that I want to embody and be. And along this journey, I ended up being a software engineer, as that was the way to get the visa in this country, and very grateful for that. And in due time, I ran into the Terran Collective folk, and really have resonated a lot with what they're on about and what they're trying to do. And initially I volunteered. I just have that helped out a little bit with introducing mapping to the platform. And now I've been working with the team for like almost a year and a half as a software engineer. And I also, one of my other roles that I claim is, or until recently, was the chief land steward for an unofficial title for the organization, as I've moved out in the last few years to Grass Valley in Northern California, a Nishanan land. That's indigenous folk who have stewarded this land for most of its existence, or human habitation. And we've got 5 acres out here, but I've been usurped by one of our other teammates, Krisha, who is now a steward of 200 acres in Costa Rica, which is just the beginning of a really wonderful, well, this isn't just the beginning of that project, but it's the beginning of that project being attached to a specific piece of land. So that is, I think, my little intro, and excited to delve into bioregionalism and the role of technology. And I'm always happy to geek out about maps, even though it's kind of all like on the job and I don't actually have the formal education.
Vince, I don't know if you want to start off with the first post intro question or not. I could say something, but I'm going to give you the opportunity.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I have a question about y'all's story, and kind of I noticed it was very interesting looking over your history, how you went from what seemed like a more traditional startup to what is now a kind of non-traditional or pretty like bleeding edge kind of you're working in a space that's both in the Web3. Also, you transitioned from a for-profit to nonprofit, which is an unusual move. I know because an organization that I've been part of did the same thing. It's mostly the other way around that people go. So just curious about the history of Hylo and kind of how, I don't know how this organization and your involvement in it has evolved and changed over time. I was curious about your story, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the biggest question I'm hearing is about the story of Hylo. So I'm going to start there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hylo was founded in 2015 by two of our good friends, Edward West and Julia Pope, amazing humans who we love and are still advisors. And they ran it for about 5 years as a for-profit collaboration tool. And they were semi-successful. Like they were able to secure, I think, about $3 million in capital investment. They had a lot of amazing groups on the platform. But ultimately, it didn't seem like they found a viable business model, I suppose. They weren't able to get past a certain velocity. And they ended up selling it to Hylo, which is a Web3 company that are the creators of Holochain. And Holochain was interested in using the interface as the UI for its chat application that they were working on at the time. And then they didn't have any intention to keep the legacy app running. And that's how the relationship was brokered with Terran Collective, which was that we would take on stewarding the legacy app and we'd keep it running. We'd manage it. We'd manage the database, the servers, keep the users happy. And it would be open sourced, and then we could use it to build on top of. And it was really cool and came at exactly the right time for us because we had been searching for a great community platform to use for our local Bay Area organizing. And there wasn't anything at the time that was a really obvious solution or values alignment. And so, of course, being technologists, we thought we'll build it ourselves. And so then Hylo showed up, and it had all of this amazing investment put into it and all this work. And it had already all the basics like chat and requests and offers and DMs and like all the basic things that you need. So we didn't have to waste any time building that. We could immediately start building things like bioregional coordination. So we were happy to accept stewardship of this awesome thing. And we've been operating that project as a nonprofit ever since. So it actually was a for-profit, capital-backed tech product that has been liberated from everything that comes with the VC world. And it was an exit to community, essentially. And we hold it as a community. We really see it as a tech commons. We have a pretty vibrant open source community. There's over 400 people in the Building Hylo group on Hylo who have all kinds of ideas and input. And we're looking for a way to formally like encode that stakeholder ownership and stewardship of this platform. We haven't quite gotten there yet. It's something we're really seeking guidance on. Like, do we become a DAO? Should we be a co-op? Like, what is the exact structure? We don't know that yet. But we do listen to our stakeholders every day, and that is 100% what drives the development of the platform. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thomas, do you have anything out of that?
No, not specifically. Claire is very much, she's much longer running with the project than I. I'm definitely very curious about how we do construct that, and we're in constant kind of conversation. And one of our recent partners, Zebras United, are all about cooperatives and helping people form cooperatives. So that's cool. Like, I get to learn more about that. So that's kind of like the space we're in, and excited to learn more. And I've also been, we've been tracking DAOs and stuff, and so it's really great that there's all these possibilities popping up. And I mean, also at some level, it's like, how much of it is are we going to be a constellation of different entities? Maybe there's a nonprofit arm, and then there's a cooperative arm, and they're interrelated. But yeah, it's really curious to see how it will play out, and I'm excited for that.
Nice. All right. Well, let's get into why bioregionalism. First, what is bioregionalism? Why do some of us see that as a path forward in what I think we're all kind of would consider ourselves kind of post-capitalists or striving to be post-capitalists. We see the problems with global capitalism and the embedded growth obligation and ecological degradation, et cetera, as well as inequality and extractive relationships worldwide. I guess, what is bioregionalism, and how do you see that as kind of one potential answer to this kind of runaway train that we all, I would assume we all kind of see that we're on. And then we'll get into like how Hylo kind of how Hylo promotes that. But first, let's talk about bioregionalism.
Yeah, I'll jump in. So I first came into contact with this idea through reading the works of Gary Snyder. Love the beats. And yeah, I picked up his book, The Practice of the Wild. And it's a really incredible lyrical short volume. And I'm paraphrasing, but he says that a bioregion is a membrane that is expressed by the landscape. So it's an area that already exists in nature. No one needs to draw a line on a map for the bioregion to exist. And all of the beings that make their home in a bioregion create like a palimpsest of like these layers, and that overlapping picture is the bioregion. So like, what are the trees? What are the animals? What are the humans doing in this landscape? What is the hydrology, the geology, how is energy flowing in this space? And it is a way that human society has organized itself from time immemorial. The people in a landscape depend on each other because they're the ones sharing resources with each other. And to me, that just makes so much embodied sense as a way to organize ourselves. Much more sense than drawing straight lines on a map and just saying that this is the division and that's it, and we don't care at all that this line makes no sense and is wrong. And I think it's especially important when it comes to how we use resources and the need to relocalize production. I believe that a world is coming where we're not going to be able to just like order things from China on Amazon anymore. And when that world gets here, we are going to need to provide for our own needs in our own landscape among our own communities. And if we're already participating in coherent local bioregional entities, it's going to be a lot easier of a transition.
Can I interject something real quick?
Yeah.
If we're building kind of a software to help us localize and organize bioregionally, but the tech infrastructure that maintains the software are global supply chains that probably can't be localized because we need minerals from all over the world, and we need, capabilities, manufacturing capabilities all over the world. Is it kind of multi-scale where some things are localized to the bioregional scale and some things are maintained global? I'm curious what you think about that.
I don't have a great answer for that. I don't know. This is a trick question. I hope that we are able to get far enough along that by the time we're not able to just coerce people to mine for rare earth minerals anymore, we don't need the technologies at all. So we don't see Hylo as like the end destination. We don't see people using Hylo as the end goal. We see it as a means to an end. And one of our biggest metrics is, by using this technology, are people getting so much value that it's saving them time in their daily life and delivering tons of value and driving connection off the platform and like doing cool things in the world with the people around them. That's the metric. And if we have the use of these technologies for the next 10 years, 20 years, that's great, because 20 years of organizing can get us really far. I don't assume we'll have these technologies forever. And we absolutely should find ways to manufacture them locally, to use materials that are relatively regenerative. I don't know if that's possible. Everyone does need to get a holo port so that we can at least be running our own networks. Yeah, I think we'll go as far as we can to being able to run these networks locally and in a distributed fashion. But yeah, I don't assume they'll last forever.
I hate to dominate the questions here, but Vince, just real quick, I'm curious what your thoughts on that are.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at like present trends over the last few years, and like they're moving in that direction that you're describing, which is interesting. So it's like doomer optimism is prophetic in that sense, right? Because boom, the pandemic hits, and suddenly all this stuff that's theoretical is suddenly very much more real. And there's a huge move toward relocalizing a lot of technology companies' pipelines and their supply chains. And see it with Tesla and Ford and a lot of especially the motor companies, but also with all across the board. And there's a kind of, I guess there's a relationship that I see described, which is interesting, between resiliency and efficiency, that these things are in kind of inverse relationship. So we have kind of, you can become more resilient in these global supply chains and have, a more ability to move and flex and have more supply of things and not less just in time, movement of goods and services that assumes everything's going to be, shipping lines are going to be good, et cetera. No wars. But then as soon as the resiliency comes online, there's less efficiency. So suddenly prices go up and inflation, and it's like, oh my God. So I see that relationship playing out right now. And I see like the global, I guess, capitalist world trying to figure out how to have their cake and eat it too. And so to me, it's very much a really relevant question, what you're asking, like, how do we build a raft that'll get us as far as we need to go, at least to the other side of the shore, to use a Buddhist metaphor. Sorry. And yeah, I think it's a really good question. I see that the world is trying to respond to that already. So I don't know if that means they'll be able to or not, but will global companies be able to make this move to relocalizing? The mineral thing is an interesting question. I know less about that than you are. I saw that giant book you're reading from the dude that's like the mineral,
Schmill.
There you go, Schmill. Yeah, Bill Gates guru. So anyway, curious. I'm very curious. I don't have anything to add there. I just see it's doomer optimism's been ahead of the curve in talking about these things because they're very real now.
Just if I can jump in and maybe a little tangential mix of a few of these themes. So locally, there's an effort to reopen a gold mine where in Nevada County in California, and this is the classic gold rush. And so, of course, I have problems with the specific people who are in charge of running it. They have a history of fucking over Indigenous folk in Canada, if I'm allowed to use the F word. Apologies otherwise. And so I'm very skeptical of the people who are proposed to run it. But also I'm like, well, I don't want to be a NIMBY. Like we need, like, if we want these things, if we want, like computers, etc. Is there a case for saying, hey, like we really should source this locally? So I feel like that's a really interesting question for our sort of sense of like bioregionalism or localism, and the interplay with the global sort of trade scheme. There's some question of like fairness as well, because like a lot of the ecological destruction of our consumption is kind of offshored. And at a minimum, like I feel like one of the things around bioregionalism for me is being more responsible of our consumption and being more like directly hooked into the consequences of that. Like I might want to build a log cabin, and if I source that wood locally, then I know that like I'm living that ecosystem. I can see the impacts of that. If I'm dependent on the current globalized lumber trade, then those trees are being pulled from like British Columbia and sawmilled up there, and we don't even have the sawmills in the local area that are certified to like handle the volume. So these are a couple of like little interesting conundrums or like questions that come up for me and in all of this.
Yeah. Well, I guess would you resonate with not just bioregionalism, but networked bioregionalism, meaning that there's kind of like global solidarity. So this idea that we localize a lot of our production at a bioregional scale, probably not all of it, as long as we have digital technology, but we're still communicating mimetically, informationally, and people are still traveling at a global scale. So we have this kind of like diffusion of innovation, networking across bioregions. Is that part of like the bioregional vision that you see? I mean, I assume it is, because Hylo itself is not confined to one bioregion. So, and it seems the architecture is set up that you have, you can have easy networking, across Hylo groups that might be more localized. Do you want to speak on that, on kind of like this kind of, because the danger of localism and bioregionalism is,
Parochialism.
to a point where it's like everyone for themselves, right?
Yeah.
And you're not taking the best of kind of cosmopolitan ethos, of having ideas spread around the world. Yeah. I'm curious what your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, I'll maybe just briefly answer on my behalf. I love mangoes, right? I still want to get, like mangoes. I still feel like there's wonderful things from different areas, and there will be some degree of specialization still. Like will New Zealand or the south of Ireland still be like global dairy exporters? I don't know. That's like you can get dairy a lot closer, even though they're amazingly effective places for that to be produced. But I think it's the prior paradigm is built on cheap energy to move things around, and that hasn't factored in the externalities of climate change. And maybe part of my journey with bioregionalism isn't starting with the idea itself, but like encountering a lot of the problems of like the arbitrary lines drawn in a piece of territory, or the externalities of moving all this stuff around. And so I personally really hope that there'll be levels of interconnection, but and trade, but still just an increasing awareness and focus on our kind of like local and relationship to land, like relationship to the place that we're from, and the things that we have a relationship to that place as well. I mean, I don't know if there's a Hylo perspective on this, and if so, then like Claire is totally better placed to answer that. But
Yeah, thanks, Tom. I would call this our grand strategy. Our grand nefarious strategy would be to have lots of bioregions on Hylo organizing among themselves and then connected to each other in a polycentric network of bioregions around the world, because we are all interconnected. We all depend on each other. Even people across bioregions, our resource use is still impacting everyone. Deforestation in the Amazon affects the hydrologic cycle in California, etc. And we also don't believe in silos, in metaphorical silos, because no single group alone is going to save the world or regenerate the world or whatever. We have to be connected. We have to work together as a broader movement. And we have to do that at local, bioregional, and global scale in order to get anywhere. So that is absolutely a part of the plan here.
Nice.
I have a question about going back to the bioregional mapping. So I want to get really practical because I feel like there's a problem with the on the ground like implementation of this mapping. For instance, I've been working on this idea in the background of a bioregional retreat network, and the idea is really simple. Instead of everyone flying to California or to upstate New York or wherever, 100 people, flying around to go on retreats, how about figuring out where everyone already is and doing retreats in your own bioregion? Well, the challenge, there's a lot of challenges, but one of the challenges I run into even in prototyping out this idea is in people identifying where they are, because there's the bioregion, which, as you said, is sort of defined based on biological realities. Like these kinds of creatures live together in an interdependent kind of way, in a kind of general sense in this areas. And water flows in this areas. And so you have water coming, here. And all of this makes sense. But humans don't, part of the problem with modernity is we've dissociated from these, our identity of place, from like where we are in many ways. We've become identified with ideas and kind of networks that are conceptual versus like I'm a Republican or a Democrat or whatever, versus I'm embedded in the Shenandoah River Valley, and I know the history of this place and where the creek comes from and how much stuff is in the creek. So I guess I have, just a general question about the practical mapping. When human beings are so disconnected from place, how do you use place to help organize them? Is there a sort of UI UX trick here where we need to, meet people where they are and then kind of bring them in a journey, where they like have to go through, I don't know, a couple of years of shamanic training or something? Because that's the only place I see people really transform around this, is like through deep, long, prolonged engagement with like, I don't know, this stuff. So just a question.
I'm happy to jump in there. And certainly, this is an enduring challenge for bioregionalism. And one of the things one of the kind of like memes or ideas from my like international relations background that I bring to this is the idea of imagined communities. And in that context, it was about nation states. They're an imagined community. In that there's a narrative, there's myth, there's story that connects that community. And it's not like, at some level, like an Australian that grew up in Perth on the West Coast and we've grown up in completely different situations, but we still would listen to the same youth broadcaster, Triple J, and listen to the same music. And so there's like ways in which this imagined community makes sense. But often the time, the challenge particularly with nation states, is that they're so widely encompassing. There's rifts and there's tears at the edges. And while a lot of nation states have gone through this process, different Germanic groups forming into Germany and et cetera, and they're relatively stable, even though there's some weird edge cases. Like I think Yugoslavia or the former Czech Republic, or aspects of those nation states that have like fallen apart because these narratives haven't stuck people together. They have to resonate with people. So bioregions, I think, also have to resonate with people. And like you're saying, we're somewhat disconnected, or part of modernity's outcome is disconnection from our land. So we certainly are in a situation where we are trying to guide people back into relationship as a movement. We've got to try and figure that out, while also, like, and this is something I've kind of like gone back and forth on. Like, as much as I want to draw a bunch of bioregions on the map because I'm a map nerd, I show up to the middle of the US and I say, "This is your bioregion," and people are like, like, it doesn't resonate with them. Like, there needs to be some sort of story, or some way to sort of pitch it and engage them, or to go to them and say, like, think, if you can think in these different ways about the land that you're on, like, what makes sense to you in terms of sort of your home region, and get them to start being involved in this sort of I guess bioregional way of thinking, and then through that process emerges their concept of a bioregion. And then you go, the town next over, and you do it again with someone else, and that bioregion is similar but different. And now we're in this situation of like, okay, like, how do we build a sort of resonant pattern out of these different sort of points of view? So we're very well, I'd say, in a lot of my thinking around this, I have a lot of ideas about how we could build a sort of a journey for someone to join Hylo and be asked sort of questions like, oh, like, where do you go every week? Like, what places in nature? Like, what's your kind of like the land you already have relationship to? Like, if you go up to Tahoe to go skiing, you have a relationship to that land as well. It's different than if you live there, but and through that process, can we then start collecting enough fragments from different individuals to, okay, like, I feel like there's this, something's cohering here around, whether it's the Sacramento Delta bioregion, or the Bay Area bioregion, or the foothills of California bioregion, that through a sort of iterative process, we get to some more resonant bioregions. And that's not a clean answer, in a way, like, because sometimes you just want to have a drop-down list and put someone, okay, I just want to sort them into this bioregion, boom. So those are a lot of the things that I'm kind of grappling with, and I'm curious if any of you all have different ideas, or I know Claire and we've discussed this, and Claire's discussed this with Tibet and Aaron, and they've got different takes on that as well. And maybe like Salmon Nation is an interesting use, like an example of a really strong narrative for a very large bioregion.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. I'm happy to talk about Salmon Nation a little bit and respond to this question. It's a really good question. Bioregional identity. How can we help people connect with that? And the first thing I'll say in response to, or just building on what Tom was sharing, is that there isn't any mandatory need for people to pick one bioregion. The idea of a bioregion is highly subjective, and each individual deer, bear, salmon, human is going to have their own definition of their landscape that matters to them, and like what bioregion they're a part of. And the reason I use membrane to describe bioregion instead of boundary is because of that. Like, this is not a new version of lines on a map, which is a fundamentally colonial thing to do. This is going to be an overlapping and intersubjective exercise, and it doesn't have the neatness of discrete nation states. And that messiness is kind of hard to deal with, especially if you're in the business of making a map. But it's part of a new way of looking at the world that we need to learn to be in relationship with. And then just real quick, like, how do we help people identify with landscape and the idea of a bioregion? There's a huge role for arts and culture here, and storytelling, as Tom was saying. We have to share a story that inspires. We have to have a better party. It's all about having the best party. And some things that I've seen work really well is holding like a festival. Like Cascadia has a Cascadia festival, and that's really cool. The Ozarks have been doing a bioregional gathering every year for decades. And Salmon Nation is one that Tom mentioned. And that is a territory that represents the historic range of Pacific salmon, stretching from Alaska down to the Bay Area. And that's a huge geographic spread, but everyone who lives there is united and dependent on the health of salmon, which are a keystone species that represent the well-being of this landscape and the waters that intersect with it. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, no, I'm just reflecting on, as you said, on the one hand, bioregions are based on kind of ecological factors as well as cultural factors, which they co-inform each other. But there's so many different ecological metrics to define a bioregion. I kind of think of just offhand Southern Appalachia as a bioregion, but if you think about it in terms of watersheds, it's not, right? I'm right near the Continental Divide, and where it divides, where it would go to, the Atlantic or, go down to the Mississippi Basin, it doesn't feel like, an emotional division to me, right? Like that still feels like the same region to me because it's mountainous and there's similar cultural elements. And so, there's so many different ways based on, as you guys were saying, geology and various species, habitat zones, climate zones, et cetera, that it seems like you're kind of saying that we have to somehow nurture the flexibility of each individual being able to kind of think about these and, beyond, individuals, even beyond humans, of think about these in their own way, but at the same time, so there's kind of like this pluralism here, but we need to find coherence as well, in this pluralism. And so maybe that means that, would this mean that we're kind of like part of many nested overlapping bioregions, or, and what would that look like? That's a whole different way, going back to what you were saying, Vince, of like a net, we need some kind of initiation into this kind of very fluid, ecologically based notion of self and world in relationship to land. And this is a big jump in human, postmodern human cultural evolution, right? Maybe it's not a big jump because this is the way that people saw themselves for millennia in the past. But now we're doing it on platforms, right? And we're doing it with the baggage and the opportunities, affordances of modernity. So that's interesting. So maybe we can jump into Hylo. And I guess what is the theory of change around Hylo? Is it kind of people might jump onto it because it's just a good platform, and then they kind of move in a kind of bioregionalist direction in terms of just, these activities are happening locally and they're bioregionally informed? Or is it you kind of need to be bioregionally minded to start using it? And what are some of the key features of Hylo as opposed to another social media platform that would facilitate this kind of bioregionalist direction?
Cool. Okay, so let's dive in. So Hylo is a platform for purpose-driven groups. It's not really just a general social media platform. It's for people that have something shared that they are stewarding together or working toward together. And that can be anything that calls to your care. It's not just for place-based groups. We just especially like them. But our theory of change is that it's actually all about trust and relationship building. And those are the critical, necessary things in order to have collective sense making, a shared reality, collective decision making. So, how do we steward the things we're holding in common? And action. How do we have an impact on the things we're actually trying to impact? And all the technology in the world will not help you accomplish much of anything if you don't have trust and resilient relationships in the humans that are doing those things together. And we don't know this from being technologists. We know this from being humans that are involved in our local communities and in organizing those communities in various ways. And living in intentional community too. Like, you have to have trust. If you're trying to make like complex coordination, trying to like steward a shared resource, a shared landscape, making decisions amongst like property owners, there's no way you're going to be able to do that without some kind of relational field, some kind of trust. And so that is what Hylo is calibrated to support. It's not just a collaboration platform. Everything embedded in it is designed to facilitate those relationships and that trust so that groups can be evolving and growing in their capacity to achieve impactful action. So that's the theory of change. And yes, if you show up on the platform and you're just there to be part of a group that is like a group that cares about some pop culture thing and you all care about that thing together, that's really cool. And you're going to be exposed to ideas around things like mutual aid, because the posts that you choose from when you're sharing things on the platform, it's discussions, but it's also sharing resources, requests, and offers, and projects and events. And the request and offer is so critical because that allows you to really show up as who you are and say what you need and have people in your group meet you in that need, or to offer what you have and for people to receive that. And when that interaction happens and then it actually is carried out, that creates trust and it creates accountability. It's peer-to-peer accountability. And that is a really critical base layer for effective communities. And there's a lot of other stuff that goes into how we design Hylo. Another thing I'll briefly mention before diving into the bioregions is that we work with a group called Pro-Social World. It's a bunch of researchers. They're really awesome humans. They wrote a book called Pro-Social, and it's grounded in evolutionary biology and psychology. And the authors had a relationship with Elinor Ostrom, who wrote a book called Governing the Commons. And it's all about research around the world with groups effectively managing common resources. And they followed the principles that she derived from those groups and have made it into an entire framework for any group to be more effective, collaborative, and equitable. And so almost everyone on our team has gone through their training, and we use their methodologies so much internally, and it's completely transformative. Highly recommend it. And so when we look towards how we continue to build these tools into Hylo to help groups be effective, that's one of the things that we're drawing from. And Pro-Social is amazing because you could use it to scaffold an entire group culture that absolutely will deliver success for your group. So we can go into that more if desired, but just on the bioregional aspect, the biggest thing is that there's a geographic map. It seems obvious, but most social networks don't have one. It's crazy. So with Hylo, anything that you share, you can have a location on it, and then it shows up on the map. And so within your group, you can see what's happening, where your people are, where an event is, a resource. And groups can now also draw their geographic area. So if your group is a place-based group, you can say what that place is, however large or small you want to. It does involve drawing a line on a map, but we don't take that too seriously. And things we want to do in the future is, for instance, when someone creates an account, they can share their location if they want, and then we could go ahead and suggest groups to them based on their location. So like, oh, you're in California, you could join this bioregional group if you want to, or you could join Salmon Nation if you're in Northern California. And then you are exposed to this idea that there are people gathering based on their landscape. Yeah, so that's just a beginning. I know Tom has a lot more things he could share about what we'd like to do around mapping here, if you want.
Well, I think a really critical part is the relationships we're cultivating with different groups and bringing them on the platform. If that's like seeding, while a lot of groups are on the platform to like organize internally and like get value out of it in terms of their internal connections, what we want to see over time is that like, oh, there's this other thing that's happening nearby, or what's this other group doing? And that they are drawn into other groups that are adjacent in terms of theme. So like maybe you're all excited about social justice matters in the Bay Area, and then you get sort of drawn to, oh sweet, there's this regenerative agricultural thing where I can go and volunteer at an urban farm. Or you get drawn into city planning and like trying to figure out how to do that more ecologically. If there's a group that's like, we're really keen to like get better housing in California because that's like a huge problem for us. And so in part, it's also just we want to keep cultivating a user base and a community of adjacent peeps who like are all working on different parts of the challenge. It's like no one group, no one person can like hold it all. Oh my God. There's so much going on. So I think that for me is like a really important thing for us going forward.
Yeah. That sounds like the networked part you were talking about, Jason, of the networked bioregionalism.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Yeah. Well, I'm just looking at this pitch deck here, and so I'm just going to bring up. So it seems like there's aspects of governance, there's aspects of resource sharing. We have participatory budgeting. I see things like peer-to-peer learning networks, finding and funding regenerative projects. And so it seems like what we're trying to build here is both, an alternative economic system, an alternative governance system based on principles of the commons and cooperative networks. Is that fair? And do you want to talk about, I guess, any of these other features that you're developing that I see on this pitch deck?
Sure. Yeah. And we're kind of trying to do this undercover, so we don't need too much attention brought to ourselves. No, I'm just kidding.
I take that back.
No. But what you're describing is what we want to be focused on in the coming year. We call it our stewardship toolkit. And it has 4 big elements that are things that we have heard from our partners time and time again are the things that they really need to do their work in the world. And they're not finding the tools that really provide them in the way that they need. And so the different elements here are pro-social, governance, trust/reputation, and then bioregions or place-based aspect. So I shared a little bit about pro-social as a framework for creating collaborative group culture. The governance aspect is really, really a big deal because we do need tools to steward shared resources. And the governance framework that we use internally that we really respect is called sociocracy. It is a way for distributing power to the edges in a system that's based on trust and consent. So the idea is that there are circles, the circles are connected to each other in an accountability in structure with people linking between circles, and each circle has its own purpose and it has its own domain of responsibility. And so inside of Hylo, we have our general circle, and we have our product and engineering circle, we have our community circle, we have strategy, we have ops. It's what you might expect inside an organization, but it's a very flexible structure, and any group could create whatever circles are relevant to what they do in the world. And what happens within a circle is decision making based on trust and consent around what that group has domain over. So if you are the budgeting circle, you can make financial decisions, but the decision is only made if everyone in a group is consenting to that decision. It's different from consensus. You don't have to all agree 100%, but the decision has to be good enough for now, safe enough to try. And you can have a term, and you can say in 3 months we'll reevaluate this. But it's a framework that we've found to be really effective. And Hylo is already really well set up to have a sociocratic organization because of our nested group architecture. We call it holonic architecture because it's a series of holes. But in Hylo, a group can be a member of multiple other groups, and each group can have unlimited subgroups. So you can create a really robust group architecture that matches how groups and movements actually collaborate in the real world, which can be quite complex and quite interconnected. And that's really cool. And that's one of the super unique things about Hylo. Yeah, the other two things are bioregions, which we've touched on considerably. And then the last element I want to mention is trust and reputation. It's a really sensitive topic, but we think it's important to give people the ability to signal who they respect in what domains. And then we can use that information to allocate roles and responsibilities in a group. So the first way we want to implement that is in moderation. Online moderation is a huge, huge thing. We can spend plenty of time on that if desired. But we don't think moderation should be a top-down thing where there's like a godlike admin who can just make all the decisions and block people when they say something that they don't like. Moderation should be a collective activity. Everyone in the group is responsible for maintaining the vibe and agreements that the group has identified. And being able to take action based on that is maybe something that should be earned. But you have to be trusted to take on key responsibilities in a group, right? And so what we've designed is a system where people can say, I trust this person to be a moderator. I trust this person to hold our crypto wallet. I trust this person to watch my dog. I trust this person to watch my child. And in a group, whatever kinds of trust matter, that group would be free to say who in that group is most trusted in those things. And then those people could automatically hold the responsibilities that the group is indicating they deserve to hold. This becomes especially exciting when we think about a bioregional group that no one is in charge of. There's no owner of a bioregion. There might be some conveners, but there's no automatic authority, no one to automatically dole out the admin keys. So in a bioregional group where we can share who's trusted to serve as a facilitator, for instance, that can emerge from the community expressing who is trusted to be a facilitator. And then that person could programmatically get that permission on Hylo. So those are some of the ways we're thinking about the tools that are really needed to do this kind of work at the scale of the landscape.
Vince, you were messaging me about a practical application that we could do in our group, where we had a Twitter group chat of people who just live in Western North Carolina, interested in regen ag or bioregionalism or whatever. And we're just like, I still haven't gotten like half the people onto Hylo. I'm trying to, and we haven't much besides post a few messages. And I think I'm like the de facto dictator right now, but I hope to be relieved of that responsibility and all of that. So that's just the context for this question, that we're a very early fledgling Hylo group. But anyway, Vince, with that context, do you want to bring that up or?
Yeah, I mean, I just wanted to point out that like when I think it was Benjamin in our group pointed out Hylo, and very quickly we're checking it out. It sort of fit with the kinds of things we were already talking about doing, or even doing, having regional gatherings occasionally, meeting up, doing stuff like that. And it kind of fit the basic. It just seemed to be custom fit for the kind of group that seems to be emerging. So in that sense, it was really cool to see. And there was one very practical thing I've been sitting with that I saw Hylo could enable that for me felt like an important example in this group, which is at some point I intend to post on there, like looking for someone to come and help with some like home renovation work who won't just do it as for pay, but I will pay you, but also is willing to take me on as a kind of like apprentice. I want to learn as we get the work done, recognizing I'm not going to be able to do this right now, but I want to learn. I have the resources. I'd like to support someone in my network. And that kind of thing where you're kind of mixing models. It's not like a kind of pure friend or family model where there's some expectation of mutual exchange that's going to come in some weird way, like one down the road, nor is it a pure capitalist model. It's some hybrid. So I saw that was really possible in this context. And I got excited about that to see that this tool enabled something new in this emerging group of bioregional friends. So for what that's worth, I wanted to share that as a practical thing.
And how specifically would this tool compare to, say, a Facebook group enable this? Like, is there a specific like functionality?
Yeah, I think it's like in the is it the offer request function? I think it seems to get more directly at that. Whereas for me on Facebook, it's like it's like the marketplace. It's a capitalist thing. If I'm posting in a group, even, there are people who are there, like their business is to like notice when people are posting things on Facebook and like this is how which is fine. I totally appreciate that. But I'm looking for, I don't want to be in a relationship with someone whose whole premise of their business is to keep me from learning, and I see that as very much the dynamics in the capitalist market space, where it's like, no, I want to keep you, completely ignorant so that I can keep selling you my stuff, which fair enough.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And presumably we'd have to have the trust of like, okay, if I'm going to teach these other people my skills, if I'm living in a capitalist system, I wouldn't want to do that because then I wouldn't have a way to make a living. But in an alternative framework where, I guess, what would we call it? An abundance economy or something where, we actually, the more people know, the more capable more people are,
the better
everyone is, right? Yes. And it's not a zero-sum game. It's not a competitive game.
There's efficiency and resilience again, I think, in some way, because it's like the more people know it and more distributed it is, the more resilient we are. But maybe there's less efficiency for any one person to like build a lucrative business on top of the need, because there's not as much need. Right.
Yeah.
So that's a challenge. How do we negotiate our way into that when there's like the very real needs of people's livelihood?
Yeah, right, I think. Sorry, Claire and Tom, if we're kind of like colonizing this conversation with our internal. So like, we've been trying to start by just kind of meeting up because a lot of people haven't met up, right? We just know each other's Twitter avatars. And maybe do like shared work days where we, go to each other's places, help each other out with projects, and get to know each other. And I'm wondering, Vince, if you think like what's the first step here to cultivating kind of environment where where that can happen? Is it meeting up,
Seems like
shared projects, shared work, and shared fun.
Yeah, that seems like the hardest lift is actually doing that. And yeah, I think so.
We almost got together once at someone's place to help them on their farm, but then it got rained out, and then so it's that's the difficult part in bioregions as well. Like you were talking about Salmon Nation being such a geographic extent, distance still matters, even if you're in the same bioregion, right? And so practically building trust in tangible, physical ways on shared projects, requires that you might have to drive 4 hours or something. And that's, yeah, maybe I can throw this question out in your all's experience of, kind of collaborating on projects on a bioregional scale when it's a lot easier to meet up with people in your county, not in, a different state. Tom, you have your hand raised.
Oh, I raised my hand. Yeah, I think this does link back to some of our kind of like push and pull around this idea of like what constitutes a bioregion, or and these questions are like, oh, what about a watershed? What about this? Like, oh, this really makes sense that Salmon Nation is a thing. And if that was the like, in terms of like a bioregion, it's not very practical. It doesn't cover all of my needs. The Yuba and the Bear River, which are really vital rivers in my area, both have a relationship to the salmon rod. So I am in Salmon Nation. And that doesn't, I'm not like, I'm not oriented towards like flying up to, or like heading up to Seattle to really, like, that's not going to fulfill all of my sort of like bioregional desires and focuses. I think it's important, and I want to be involved in discussions around dams and watersheds and the health of the downstream water. But I do think that there is a space for, even as we like settle on different ideas about, okay, maybe you're a part of a specific watershed, and that's one way that you're organized. But there's a smaller, maybe I've called it like your home region, where it is a lot more intimate, and it is a lot more like, like for me, I'm like, how can we encourage people to also really have that relationship with, I feel like in urban planning, there's often this concept of like, how far away can you get in like 30 minutes from your home? And like, that's kind of your like, your center of gravity, or, like what have you. And I think for me, like what makes sense as we go forward into this is like, yes, I want to be tapped into my watershed. Yes, it makes sense for me to like be a part of the Salmon Nation group and like see where I can be connected through that. But there's even a smaller unit of and maybe I wouldn't call it a bioregion, because maybe we need to have some level of like hierarchy, or it's not a hierarchy, but there are thematic overlaps for different things, but kind of like my home region. And like for me, I'm like, okay, like roughly that is the area that is contained within, to the north, the Yuba, and to the south, the Bear River. And it is defined by a lot of like human cultural aspects of what are the community centers that I'm drawn to, so I kind of feel like, yeah, in terms of, like maybe once in a while you're going to do that big schlep to get across country to like do a big gathering, because I think that's important. Like festivals that draw a wider net, that bring us together, or like things that bring us together from over a wider net, are really important. And part of me, I think, part of my desire is how can we keep bringing ourselves back to the immediacy of the place around us and the relationship with the place around us. And I'm like, damn, I need to go and like bug my neighbor who's the local fire chief, because I want to borrow his wood skidder so I can get some lumber milled. I wish I had a better relationship with him, but he doesn't reply to my texts. Like it, and it's like I got to figure out some way to cross that cultural gap, because I'm this like unusual accented fellow from yonder, and he's a bit more of like the salt of the earth local forester dude. So yeah, but I think that's an important thing I got to try and figure out.
Yeah, there seems to be this. I mean, if we wanted to do a binary, I would theorize there's a community which we could say is your physical set of physical relationships, centered around geography, so say your neighbors or within your town or your county. And then there's your network, which is mediated by digital technology. But in reality, it's really a gradient, because the idea is, as you were saying, Tom, is maybe once a year you travel across the bioregion to actually meet up with people and engage in activity, but that's not most of your activity. So there's these nested layers of intimacy. And how do we manage that, right? Like if I don't know my neighbor enough to be able to borrow a piece of machinery or help each other out in an emergency because I'm spending too much time networking on Hylo, that's a problem.
Yeah, we definitely don't want that. We're very, like, as Claire mentioned earlier, it's like we're not in the attention economy shenanigans. Like, we want people that use the bare minimum they have to, and no more. That's the dream. Yeah, maybe just to riff on a little bit more as well. It's like the area where I live, I feel like there are a lot of people that are bioregionally like adjacent or thinking about like ways of local economies and stuff like that, but they're not connected into the nerdery of like bioregionalism as a movement. And so it's like, yeah, find the others. Like I want to connect with people that are already jamming on this same thing. Really, helpful and reassuring. Like, okay, like you get what I get. And part of the work is like going into town and like looking at the notice board and seeing the other people who are doing like permaculture courses and being like, hey, like, and I'm personally still waiting for this time when I set aside my own sort of like personal effort, like a political effort, to go and rally people in my local area that are adjacent to these concepts and get them and say, hey, we've built this incredible way to connect. We don't have to be on Facebook anymore, because that's a bunch of this stuff is happening on Facebook, but that comes with all the guff around that. Like there's dozens of local groups that are doing local shit that's awesome. And God, I just don't want to keep logging onto that thing. And a lot of people who are in those groups don't want to log onto that thing as well. So, from my own perspective, we're getting closer to that because we're still like building some of the features and polishing things. But I'm really looking forward to that coming in this year, to be able to go out into my own community and be like, pitch it and be like, hey, like, I think this is a better way for us to organize. And that, and, when I say that, I'm going to be doing it like, can you trust me?
Mm-hmm.
So.
Claire, did you have anything to add to that?
Yeah. I'm just thinking about my grandfather. He was a farmer in Indiana, and he grew commodity crops. And I grew up listening to my mom's stories about life on their farm. And the image in my mind right now is of harvest days, when it was time for a harvest. And this would have been in the 1950s and 60s. When it was time for a harvest, all of the local friends and relatives would gather on one farm and all work together for that day or several days. And she remembers like her mom would make a huge spread and feed all these people, and that's because like it was their turn and they got to benefit from the community coming together, and then they would go and do it on someone else's land and someone else's land. And when I like in my deepest hopes for what Hylo could be, it could be something like that. The place where you organize the in-person, on the ground, hands in soil effort, and you take turns doing that, and you create an event for it, you put it on the map, and you have that gathering and you do the thing. And yeah, are people going to drive from 4 hours away to do that? Probably not. It's probably mostly going to be people that are closer in, but you never know. But a local group, a bioregional group, that is a place where you could post that thing and know that you're probably going to find people that can meet you in that thing. Yeah, and for the groups that are way bigger, like Salmon Nation is a huge bioregion. I am working with Salmon Nation Trust to develop their online community of people that are on the ground doing awesome things in their communities. And that effort is called the Edge Prize. It's awesome. There's a bunch of prize money attached to it. We're giving away $85,000. And what we're doing there is we're going to have the online community on Hylo, and we're going to have about 2 months of programming and training that we're offering people. And we're also hoping to do in-person gatherings, but we're not just going to do like one in-person gathering in Seattle or Vancouver. I'm going to see where people are geographically clustered and then have distributed local gatherings. And so we can still do that and be like acting as a bioregion and mindful of the bioregion, but what's happening is a local physical gathering of humans. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, that's kind of, I think where the Doomer Optimism community is evolving, or I'm hoping it's evolving, is this last year we kind of had a focus on, hey, let's have bioregional meetups. And there was a couple that were pretty successful. One in the Portland area and one in the Driftless, Wisconsin area. But that for me is kind of, besides just the content and the conversations, it's like, well, what's next? We're talking about community and tangible things, but we're having these more abstract conversations. So what's the next? What's the next kind of step? And my kind of hope, because I'm totally on board with the Hylo vision. I think it's exactly, it definitely aligns with my values, and I'd like to see our little group be successful in order to convince some of my more tech skeptical compatriots in the Doomer Optimism world that this could be helpful for their regions as well, and their meetups and their activities. And so I kind of see it as, let's see if we can make this a proof of concept. So we'll see. So I guess that's not a question. It's just, resonating with what you're saying is I think how we're thinking about things as well. And so far it's like, okay, like what's your number? Let's text each other in text groups and stuff. And that's great. We don't need to overcomplicate things, but as we hopefully evolve in complexity, I think many of these tools will be useful for us.
Yeah, if I can just jump on there, one thing that you remind me, and something that Claire has always reminded me, and all of us, yes, we're building a tech platform, but these things, they do need to be driven by people. Like the best tool, we can build the best platform, the best tool, whatever. We still recognize that we need to also enable the space for people to step up and to lead. And so we have community advocates that we want to sort of, whether they're coming from a community that we're working with, or there's a community that's kind of like, hey, like we want more guidance or like help, or we need some more help, which is at some level like what Claire is working with Salmon Nation. Like she's also doing this extra work to make their community sort of like successful in an online sense. So it's really, really critical for that aspect as well. So, and yeah, like we resonate with the tech skeptics. I've worked in the space for 9 years, and whenever someone, for example, like comes home with another doodad that's connected to the internet, I'm like, no, like it's just gonna break. So definitely sensitive to that, and yeah, want to find that right balance between utilizing the good parts of that and not getting sucked in to the vortex of it as well.
Nice. Well, I want to be sensitive of everybody's time. I'm thinking maybe 10 more minutes or so. And so just mentioning that, so I don't know, Vince, do you have any more questions or comments? And then I'll give Tom and Claire, both of you, an opportunity to kind of bring in anything else that you think that we didn't sufficiently cover, that we missed. But Vince, I want to hand it over to you if you have any other thoughts. You're on mute.
Yeah, I guess just a kind of minor thing, which is I'm working on building a piece of software right now, and it's very much in our minds, we're building a community technology. We're not building something for individuals, although individuals will use it, but it's rather for communities first. And I see a similar approach, in how you all are approaching things. You've kind of, as you said, that Hylo is it's built out of the rocket ship of a failed kind of VC startup where you have to be like 100x or 1,000,000x or whatever. But you all there was enough traction there, enough something good to continue building in a new setting. So I guess I'm curious how, as coders and builders and looking at this from a cultural software, community software point of view, how do you build for communities as you step outside of the sort of the individualist kind of capitalist framework, and in a way that lets this thing continue to grow and thrive? Because it seems like so much of the resources is still tied up in like hyper individualist capitalist projects, despite that changing.
Yeah, it's a great question. Thank you for that. So we operate 100% through relationship-driven development. And what that means is that we are funded a little bit through donations from the community, but largely through partnerships with nonprofits. And this has been true for the last 2 years since we've taken over stewardship. And so nonprofits come to us that are really aligned with our vision and needing a community tool and not seeing one that meets their needs. And instead of trying to build one themselves, which no one should ever do, they make agreements with us to do co-design and co-development, to use Hylo, but then also add a few additional features that are very specific to their needs. And we've been lucky to work with groups that have specific needs that are also on our product journey of like what we see as important to build. So some of our amazing partners have been the Planetary Health Alliance out of Harvard. It's a group of clinicians working on the intersection of public health and ecological health. Super cool global network. It's the biggest group on Hylo. Open Team is another one of our really important partners. That stands for Open Technology Ecosystem for Agricultural Management. And it's a group of technologists and farmers who are making open source technology for the regen ag movement, because a lot of the tech out there for farmers is super extractive and lame, and we can build better stuff. So something we didn't get into in this call is that we've done a lot of work with them on features specifically for farmers and ranchers and other land stewards. But that info is out there in our blog. And what we do is we really listen. We listen to these groups, not just one person in the group, but as many members of the group as possible. We have discovery sessions with them where we do our best to surface many voices and the needs of many different people in those groups and their values and their vision. And we receive that and integrate it and work together to design solutions for these people, for these humans. And that's where all of our development comes out of. So that relationship-driven aspect is really, really important to us. It's really sacred to us. It's a super unique way to do software. It's just the opposite of everything that Silicon Valley and venture capital represents. It is a very human way to craft software. It's a very organic way. Like, we're not moving very fast, but we're moving consistently and at a pace that feels natural. And everything we build, we're building because a real life group is demanding it, because they need it right now to do their work in the world. So it's really cool and it's really special, and it's really an honor to work with our partners in this way. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. So it's not A/B testing.
I mean, it would be good to be more rigorous around that stuff. If we had more resources, we'd be able to do a lot more of that kind of analysis, which is important too. Yeah. But we build stuff.
It's not purely A/B testing, or it's
no.
Not.
I mean,
we're not running experiments on our users yet. No. You'll be the first guinea pig, Jason. Don't worry. We'll get you to consent. We promise.
Yeah. Well, I'm interested in the perks of being a guinea pig. So.
When you say it like that, I mean, yeah, sure.
Nice. Well,
is it good enough for now and safe enough to try, Jason?
Very important. That's what we will ask you.
Well, yeah. So Tom and Clara, if I want to give you both the floor for final words. Tom, I don't know if there's more on the mapping. I did read your fourth blog post on the mapping element, and I know we didn't get into a lot of those technical details. I don't if that's where you want to jump off of, or whatever it is. I want to give both of you the kind of the final platform.
Well, I'll just really briefly touch on that. In that, at some level, the level of my ambition is to completely replace electoral districts and state lines and county boundaries. But to do that, we kind of need some sort of geographic underlay. And I've become increasingly, we might say, fixated on a specific form of grid to do that. And this is kind of, I've been thinking about this for a long time, and it is incredibly wonky. Like, it can be very jargon filled. And so that's partly why I've tried to do this long ride out to show people my entrance into and leading into that. But it is an idea, and I have to, at some level, first convince my teammates and then the surrounding community that it is worthy of our time in the context of all of the competing priorities and things that we must address. So, yeah, this is just the beginning of that whole process. So I'm hoping to have more time to delve into it at another point. And I think I'll just leave it there. And I really appreciate
I'll
this.
make sure that we post the link to that in the show notes, so if people want to know what you're talking about.
Yeah, I generally recommend starting from the first, because otherwise you just go right into the deep end of the weird mapping stuff, and I don't want to scare people away.
This might be a dumb question, but how related is this to raster data, meaning pixelated data that we get from satellites, where you have like a 30 by 30 meter pixel that represents a certain value, could be average rainfall or something else. Is it related to that at all? That's the first thing when I saw the images, and that's the first thing that came to mind.
Okay. Yeah, I can definitely speak to that. In a way, so the grid system, every individual part of that grid system is a cell. And so that cell, and with this grid system, it can be multiple resolution levels. So a cell could be as big as half a continent at the broadest resolution, or you can zoom right down, and the smallest at like level 15, the smallest cell is like less than the chair I'm sitting on. And so you can look at one of those cells, you can compare it to a pixel in a raster. Rasters, essentially, they're just a bunch of pixels all smushed together, and we make sense of it based on how it's classified and delineated. So maybe the shortest way to share the relationship is that the cell of the grid system, it would be about picking an appropriate resolution level, and that cell would aggregate the all sorts of data, including raster data, so like elevation, what have you, as an example. And it would aggregate it in a way that made it would just sort of like simplify the transport and display of that data. Because if, for example, I try to load a raster of the elevation of the world onto my laptop, if it's too high resolution, the laptop will just conk out. So in all these different forms of data that I'd love us to have to understand our bioregion and to share, oh, cool, like this is the border of the oak savanna that and the pine forest, and this is the intersection of those two things, or the air quality or precipitation. All these things can be aggregated into these cells in a way that makes it faster for us to draw comparisons and kind of like simplify things into something that's more digestible. That's my hope and my pitch. But I hope that was illuminating in some way.
Fellow GIS geek, this all sounds great to me. I love layers on a map that are functional, that can be used by communities, and you can add layers from participatory mapping sessions coupled with ecological data, and so this all sounds great to me. So you would see this embedded in a Hylo platform in terms of this mapping function where we locate ourselves, and then we might want to say, okay, like there's this project, we're thinking of buying some land for community land trust, for example, and we want to kind of get a sense of the amount of arable land for different types of agroecological purposes, and so we need to know about the elevation, we know about different factors, and so this could be kind of a community tool that could be then validated on the ground using more qualitative knowledge. That's kind of, this is kind of how I'm connecting this. Is this?
Yeah, I mean, it could very much be just so. Like one of the basic things is like there's a climate classification system, the Köppen climate classification system, which gives you like kind of a breakdown of like I think where CSB is the designation for the area we're in, which is kind of like a certain type of Mediterranean climate. And yeah, it would just be cool to like automatically be connected to other bioregions that have that climate region, because they might be growing cool shit that I could grow here. Like, oh, maybe I could grow olives. Yeah. So, and we do have a map, and we have a lot of layers to that currently. And part of the benefit for me, or when I'm pitching with the grid, is that it is each cell has a unique ID or a unique key, basically, that allows all sorts of other information to be kind of tabulated against it in a very efficient way. So I dream of, like, I recently read A Half-Built Garden, which I recommend strongly, and they talk about they've created watersheds. So their bioregions are basically watersheds coordinating through there, and they are uploading water health quality every day into, like, from different sensors to the dandelion networks, which are the distributed tech networks that are an overlay for them. And it's like, okay, for me, that's like the individual data with specific coordinate will be recorded somewhere, but for ease of everybody else to understand what's going on, it's best for it to be aggregated. So, like, okay, I get a general vibe of the water quality every day from this area based on the different data sources just being translated into a common grid structure that is consistent. So that's kind of like one of the flights of fancy, of where this could go.
Nice. All right. So we should wrap up soon, but Tom, if you have anything else, I know I kind of pushed you in one direction. So if you have any last words, and Claire as well, if you want to.
I'm totally great. Thank you so much. And this is a treat. I'd love to hear from Claire if she's got something else.
Well, I have to jump in on the map stuff too. And yeah, talking of flights of fancy for where mapping could go, a concept I want to bring into the space is carrying capacity, which is the ability for a given landscape to support the creatures that are making their home there. And my dream for the mapping on Hylo, and especially in the bioregional context, is that we could be providing a dashboard that's aggregating all of this geospatial data to give us a summary of, like, bioregional carrying capacity. Like, for my given landscape, how are we doing on providing for our own energy needs, providing for our own water needs, providing all the food we need? Are we a net importer of resources or a net exporter? And if we have to import all of our resources, where are they coming from, and what are we extracting from somewhere else? And if we're exporting a bunch of things like water, how is that impacting us? Like in California, we produce 80% of the world's almonds. Almonds take a lot of water to make. California doesn't have a lot of water. Why are we doing this? So to bring, like, awareness and transparency to these things is really critical, and it's another way we get to, like, that bioregional awareness and then the ability to, like, make decisions as a bioregion. So that's all really cool stuff that could happen. Right now we do have some basic map layers, and we have some overlays on those map layers. The first one that we added is pulling in the data from nativelands.ca, which is a site that provides indigenous territories around the world. And so there's a toggle on the Hylo map where you can turn that on and off and view the ancestral indigenous homeland of where you are in space. And that's really cool. And one thing that you mentioned, Jason, is the idea of, like, citizen contributions to that map. And I would love to get to a point where people can be linking to, like, any kind of geospatial data set and pulling that in and able to use that in their group on Hylo. Or people are doing, for example, in the world of, like, eco credits and ecological measure, verify, reward, you could, like, go and, like, count the trees on a parcel and say, this parcel has 100 trees. I'm attesting to that right here. And here's the pin on the map that says that. Like, this all gets us to those places where we have people engaged in regeneration, attesting to ecological health all over. and sharing the data and the stories of the land where they live. So yeah, it's really cool. And just to wrap up, this is all really personal to me. Like being in relationship with land and the people around me is something that I really deeply value. And so much so that I'm in the process of moving right now. I have packed up all of my stuff in Oakland, and my family is en route moving up to rural Northwest Washington. We're going to be living way up there near Bellingham and living on a 20-acre parcel with some really good friends. And I'm really, really looking forward to getting back to being on land and stewarding land and building local community. So for Doomers in Washington, I'm totally going to be participating in any Washington gatherings that happen, or maybe hosting some. Yeah.
Doomer optimists. Doomer optimists.
Doomer optimists. Excuse me.
We're post Doom.
Me.
Like,
Yeah, totally.
Doomers are so, they're so postmodern. We're beyond that. No.
I think that's the deep adaptation crowd.
What's that? Yeah.
The deep adaptation crowd.
Yeah, there's a lot of crossover there. Yeah. Well, great. This is great, everyone. Vince, thank you so much for joining me here. I look forward to both engaging with Hylo and engaging with you all. And I really hope more people check it out and get engaged, because I think a lot of what we say we want more ecological health. We want more economic and political autonomy. We want resilience, but we also want to be networked. I think we need to use the tools that'll make that happen, because there's plenty of tools that are working the opposite direction. And so we need to use the tools that'll make that happen. So that's my pitch to the audience to check out Hylo. The show notes will have some links, and maybe both of you can share links that you particularly want to be available. I'm going to post the pitch deck and your post about bioregions, Tom. But if there's anything else, I'll post that as well. Thanks very much, everyone. This is great.
Thanks so much.
Good to meet y'all.